Hey friends, happy Sunday. I hope that you're all having a great weekend, and I hope that your upcoming week goes nice and smooth. Really quick, before we get into the video, I just need to share some love for a few of my fans. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate every last one of you who watch my videos. You all changed my life, and I feel so incredibly lucky to get to live my dream of being a YouTuber. However, I gotta give some well-deserved shoutouts for some of you that donated directly to me with super thanks. First up, we have Untrusted Life, who donated $10 just to say that they love my videos. Like, this right here just melts my heart. I can't thank you enough for showing your support. I devote so much of my heart and soul to these videos, and it makes me smile knowing that so many of you guys enjoy them. Even more crazy though, Untrusted Life donated another $10 on a completely different video as well. They said, "I don't comment much, I tend to watch these on my smart TV, but I was equally disturbed by this episode as a kid, so here I am." Now, I appreciate this more than words could ever say. Comments are imperative for me as a YouTuber. When you guys leave comments, that tells YouTube that this is a video worth watching because it made you want to engage with it. The comment alone means the world to me, but the fact that you donated as well just makes it so much more special. With this being my full-time job now, it's the sole thing that keeps my kids, my wife, and myself with a roof over our heads and food on the table. I just want you to know that your donation goes directly to supporting my family, and that's literally the most important thing in my life. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, Untrusted Life. I really appreciate you. Next up, we have Olive Green, who also got a shout out in last week's video. So huge thanks with all of the love in the world for donating again. This time, they gave $5 to say Happy New Year, brother, to you and your family. Thank you for another great video. I'm gonna use this for my long driving. For context, the video they left this comment on was my almost 7-hour long video that's a compilation of parts 1 through 4 of the SpongeBob Season 1 review. With that being said though, thank you so much for your donation and your continued support. Also, drive extra safe on your travels, my friend. And that's going to be all the shoutouts I have for today's video. If you'd like a shoutout in next Sunday's video, feel free to use the heart-shaped super thanks button right below this video near the like and share button. Like I said, each donation directly supports me and my family, and on top of that, you get a shoutout as well. But with that being said, let's get right on to the video. Thinking back to the early days of Nickelodeon, there's just something so special about that pre-SpongeBob era. It was the days where Nickelodeon was keeping up this act that it was a network made by kids for kids, and it really just had a different feeling to it. Back then, there wasn't really an official mascot of Nickelodeon per se. I mean, we had Face over on Nick Jr., but other than that, the network just seemed to let the shows speak for themselves. In my heart though, the entirety of the Rugrats crew was the mascot of Nickelodeon at that time. Before SpongeBob, Rugrats may have been my favorite Nicktoon. Don't get me wrong, as a kid, I really enjoyed generally all of the Nicktoons that were airing back then, but as someone who was born in 1994, Rugrats was the one that just landed the best for me. Looking back, as someone who was fresh out of babyhood at that point, it was easy for me to relate to the characters and the stories being told. Granted, the situations that would occur in Rugrats were far removed from reality. It was still just close enough for it to land perfectly for me. Outside of that though, the show was made fantastically. The art style has a specific feel to it, the musical score was very unique, and the character tropes that were portrayed just worked together so well. All of these things blended together in a way that culminated in a perfect show to help springboard the network to the top. Looking back on the show, the love that it got was certainly deserved. It was like lightning in a bottle, and it goes without saying that it left its mark on Nickelodeon history. For me personally though, one of the biggest things that made this show stand out was the way that they did such a great job of utilizing each character's random quirks in a way that supported the story being told. Everything from Didi being reliant on lipshits to Chucky being afraid of his own shadow, it really just felt like these different traits were conceived with a plan in mind rather than the character being made that way just because. On surface level, it's no different than any typical friend group in a show. Each character more or less fills a specific role that makes up the formula of the show, but they were able to execute it in a way that just felt so natural. On top of that, a lot of the random quirks and gags that would come up throughout the show would continue to be played on in later episodes, and that right there really adds a lot of substance to the show in my opinion. A lot of cartoons have a tendency to work in a random quirk for the sake of a gag in a specific episode, but never really play on it any further from there. Or on the flip side, giving a quirk later on that kind of goes against pre-established lore. Like, for example, SpongeBob. In one episode, we see Plankton acting like Pearl's father in an alternate universe where him and Mr. Krabs switch lives. Then like 3 or 4 seasons later, we find out that Plankton is actually terrified of Pearl because she's a whale. Then we as viewers are just left kind of confused, questioning the canon that we had thought we already knew. Rugrats, on the other hand, did a very exceptional job of keeping those character traits in line and utilizing them in a way that felt very strategic and like it was done with a lot of care. There's so much more to love about this show. I feel like this one thing really just kind of scratches the surface of what I really appreciate about Rugrats, but it's certainly a huge part of what makes the show land really well in my opinion. And that's why today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're going to look at an early season 1 episode of Rugrats that provided us with a lot of early context of these characters that would carry on throughout the rest of the series. But first, really quick, I just wanted to say thanks so much for clicking on this video and for being a part of my YouTube journey. You rock, and I appreciate you. The episode we're checking out today is one that, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of erased from my mind. I completely forgot about this episode until I watched the show back recently. I feel like I blocked it out of my memories as a kid because I just didn't really understand what was going on. This one, if I'm being honest, is kind of a heavy episode to grasp when you're such a young child. Sure, a lot of what occurs in this episode is very light-hearted, but the true meaning behind a lot of what happens is definitely high enough to go over the heads of young kids. We're checking out the episode called Mama Trauma. As this episode starts out, we see a close-up of a crayon coloring. As the camera pans over to a light switch, we quickly learn that Tommy is drawing on the walls. As he stands there, just so proud of his art, Didi comes walking around the corner and she screams in awe of the mess that Tommy made. We hard cut right to the heart of the city where we see Stu and Didi walking out of an elevator and through what seems to be some kind of doctor's office. We then get a little more context as we hear Stu telling Didi that he can't believe that she talked him into this and that he doesn't believe in shrinks.
Dr. Lepetamine is not a shrink. He's a highly respected child psychologist. I've read all his books and we're very lucky he was able to fit us into his schedule.
But there's nothing wrong with Tommy.
How can you say that, Stu? What Tommy did today proves that he doesn't have a proper artistic outlet for his social anxieties.
Indeed, he's a year old.
As they continue to the office of Dr. Lepetamine, Stu insists that he disagrees with all of this and that once they get in there, he isn't saying anything. As the front desk lady walks them back, we see Didi and Stu sit down with the doctor.
He keeps drawing on walls, Dr. Lepetamine, just like you describe in your book Young for the Young.
I see.
I'm thinking it could be neurotic regression or maybe an underdeveloped psychokinetic gland.
I see.
Stu just gives a huge eye roll, saying, "Oh, brother," and the doctor stops dead in his tracks to ask him if there's something wrong. Stu starts popping off, saying that he has no idea what Didi is even talking about, and that he doesn't think that there's any reason for them to even be here in the first place.
And all you do is sit there and say, I see.
I see.
Tell me something. Is there an emergency exit, or is this door the only way out?
Tell me, Mr. Pickles, would you describe yourself as a happy man?
Oh, gee, I don't know. I guess so. I never really thought about it before.
I see.
As Stu gets sucked into conversation with the therapist, Tommy wanders off through the rest of the building. He sees some kids run down the hall, seeming like they're having fun, so of course he goes out towards the hall to look for some fun to be had. He sees the janitor setting out his mop bucket, and Tommy helps himself right on and takes it for a ride into the elevator, causing the mop handle to click a button, sending that elevator right down to another level. As Tommy continues through the building, we quickly learn how eclectic the operations running at this huge downtown building are. We see him find his way through the law office of Sockham, Suam, and Marshall as he crawls across their books and accidentally helps them find the precedent case that they're searching for to help an innocent man avoid going to jail. After that, he stumbles upon an artist who's painted a lovely and complimentary painting of this woman who's standing nearby covering her eyes. Tommy ends up crawling past the painting and spraying black paint on it, causing it to conveniently look like the lady has a goatee. Of course, the lady screams upon seeing the picture of herself with facial hair, and by that time, Tommy is already heading across the hall to see what else is going on. At this point, he ends up coming across a group of kids with their parents in a waiting room.
Hey, what's going on here anyway?
Oh, hang around. It's great. They give you toys to play with.
Wow.
Parents, children, may I have your attention, please?
The guy in the suit introduces to all of the kids and their parents Super Blasto Man, the fun new toy for all ages. He tells the kids to go crazy and do whatever they want with him. All of the kids seem pretty bored by the toy and they don't really know what to do with it, but when Tommy pulls the ball out of Super Blasto Man's stomach and starts playing with it, all of the other kids follow suit, tossing Super Blasto Man to the side and finally having some fun. All the meanwhile, the guy in the suit doesn't seem all too thrilled that the kids aren't using Super Blasto Man for his intended purpose. Tommy's ball flies down the hall and he starts to follow it until it goes downstairs. All of the other kids end up leaving with their parents and they take the elevator down, so Tommy waits for it to come back so that he can take it down and find his ball, hopefully. While that's happening, the two guys who are running the focus group come out of the room freaking out as they've realized that one of the toys is missing. They run off in a panic, realizing that they'll be fired for one of the top secret toys getting out with one of those kids. Meanwhile, downstairs, Tommy stumbles upon the janitor yet again, who's this time plugging in his floor waxing machine. At least, that's what I think it is. Tommy crawls up on top of the machine just like he did to the mop bucket so that he can reach his ball, which seems to have landed in an indoor ashtray, as this was 1991 and people used to smoke inside back then. Which is weird to think about too, man. I remember going to restaurants and literally people smoking in there. It was kind of gross. Regardless, victorious in getting his ball, Tommy slides down the handle for the machine, causing it to turn on and go crazy. He rides it down the hall, and we pass by Dr. Lepetamine's office yet again.
Drew was always poking at me, and poking at me, and poking at me, and then he'd always deny it.
Stu, honey, I never realized you felt this way. All those hidden conflicts with your older brother, Drew.
It's true! It's true!
Oh, Stu, darling, I feel so close to you now.
Back in the hall, Tommy gets thrown from the machine as it reaches the end of its cord. He goes flying into a mail cart that conveniently is going right into Dr. Lepetamine's office.
So, Natalie, you want to go out with me tomorrow night?
Not for all the gold in China.
How about for a chili dog, 2 Cokes, and a box of Raisinets?
What time can you pick me up?
And that's when I realized that I was a late bloomer, Doctor. I was an ugly duckling who would become a swan, only a year or two later than the other kids. At least that's what my mommy said.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pickles, but your 55 minutes are up.
What? I was just getting started.
The doctor dismisses Stu, saying that they can talk about it next week. As they walk out, Stu is talking about how much of a genius Dr. Lepetamine is. Meanwhile, Didi is questioning his credentials, holding the $250 bill in her hands.
I think because of our experience with Dr. Lepetamine, we've learned to express ourselves and to communicate with each other. And to pay attention to each other, and to never take our family for granted again.
Hey, what's that? I've never seen that toy before.
Oh, that old thing? I gave it to him weeks ago.
As the episode comes to an end, we see the two focus group guys talking about sectioning off the entire floor and searching every room for the ball that Tommy just conveniently threw into the elevator nearby. As they walk off, we see the elevator come back down and the ball leaves the building, along with the lady who's still very angry about her painting being ruined, understandably. And with that being said, that's where the episode ends. Now, right out the gate here, continuing the conversation that we had in the beginning of this video, I like this episode a lot because it's one of those really early on episodes that established quite a bit of understanding for these characters. This episode provided us with a few different layers of context as far as our different character traits go. Starting out with Didi, this episode ultimately provided us with our understanding of her as a mother, specifically as it pertains to her obsession with psychology books and the doctors that write them. This is something that would persist throughout the rest of the series very consistently. We would see Didi constantly quoting and referencing Dr. Lipschitz, and even having him over at her house at one point. Though, in this episode, it isn't Dr. Lipschitz she's referencing, as we wouldn't see him introduced until season 2, this still tells us a lot about her parenting style. She's portrayed to be a modern mother who's up to date on all of the latest parenting trends and child psychology. As a person, she's very prone to look really far into small things. This episode also laid quite a bit of foundation as far as Didi's husband Stu goes as well. He's the one who looks at things more simple and tries to look at the big picture instead of reading far into small things. This is definitely evidenced by how vocal he is about how stupid he thinks the whole therapy thing is going into it. It's definitely something that would keep up throughout the series. This episode also gave us a lot of understanding between Stu and Didi and their relationship as husband and wife, as well as parents. On top of that, it gave us the understanding that Stu has a lot of unresolved and pent-up issues with his childhood, and more specifically his brother Drew. This episode showed us that Stu is holding in a lot of his feelings and bottling them up. He's also admittedly very oblivious, for lack of a better word. Meanwhile, as far as Tommy is concerned, this one definitely was a testament to his happy-go-lucky nature and his ability to find joy and fun in essentially any situation. He's a resilient kid, and this episode gave us a good look at that. Though all of these things about Tommy had already been pretty well established from the get-go, if we're being honest. Now, circling back though to Stu being the one to look at things more simple, to him in this specific instance, he sees it as easy as Tommy drawing on the walls because he's a baby. He's literally 1 year old, and pretty much every 1-year-old in existence has gotten a hold of a crayon or a marker and drawn on the walls at some point. I mean, nowadays, they even literally make kids' markers non-toxic and washable for a reason. Kids are gonna be kids, and saying that one instance of drawing on a wall is something that a literal baby needs to see a psychiatrist for is a huge stretch, to be honest. It was kind of frustrating to see Didi sit down with the psychiatrist and immediately say that Tommy keeps drawing on walls, when in reality we saw it happen literally one time as far as we know. That's certainly one point that works in favor of Didi possibly blowing this out of proportion and kind of taking things farther than they needed to be. With that being said though, we need to keep in mind that Didi is one of the early moms who started taking a big interest in developmental health as well as mental and cognitive function in her baby. At her core, it needs to be said that she truly wants what's best for her kids. Let's say that she was right and Tommy did have an underdeveloped psychokinetic gland or maybe some sort of neurodivergency. Her intention was to make sure that he would get what help, if any, that he may have needed as early as possible. She wants to advocate for him and get a start on that as early as an age as she can, and that, in my opinion, is a great thing. Especially if we keep in mind that we find out later on in the series that Tommy was a preemie and had to spend at least the first week or two of his life in the newborn intensive care unit, or NICU for short. That right there is definitely something that takes its toll on a parent. My daughter had to spend the first week of her life in the NICU when she was born almost 10 years ago, and that was definitely one of the hardest weeks of my life. I can see exactly why Didi would be extra cautious, mindful, and want to advocate for Tommy as early as she can. With that being said though, that's definitely something to be mindful of. There are certain behaviors that can definitely be seen as possibly alarming that you might want to bring to the attention of a medical professional, but to be honest, drawing on walls with a crayon is probably not one of those things. Like, let's break this down just a little further. Didi kind of scalded Stu in this scene right here.
There's nothing wrong with Tommy.
How can you say that, Stu? What Tommy did today proves that he doesn't have a proper artistic outlet for his social anxieties.
Dede, he's a year old.
She acts very appalled at Stu, seeming offended that he would say that there's nothing wrong with Tommy, when to her, it's clear that what he did today is proof that he doesn't have a proper artistic outlet for his social anxieties. Now, with that specific wording, you'd think that if that was really the case, then it might be wise for them to maybe try exploring options for other artistic outlets, like, I don't know, maybe buying him an easel or something, rather than spending a ton of money on a psychologist to have a guy with a degree to tell them to do that exact same thing. The thing is, though, they didn't even get that much. While Didi was talking about what she perceived to be an issue with Tommy, this guy was straight up ignoring her and playing tic-tac-toe with himself. Honestly, this just kind of felt like a giant waste of $250 in the long run, but I guess it can be said that it wasn't all a waste. The psychologist honestly seemed completely checked out of the conversation until Stu brought up his issues. Then he kind of paid attention for a bit, but it wasn't long until he just full-blown passed out and Stu and Didi were having their own therapy session. I'll say this much, I think this psychologist is kind of a hack and this office is definitely questionable. I mean, they have a surgeon there literally named Dr. Hyde, and if that doesn't imply something, I don't know what does. When I say it wasn't all a waste though, I mean that in the sense that Stu at least kind of had his eyes opened at this appointment. Like I said earlier, this episode provided us with the understanding that Stu has a lot of unresolved trauma as a result of his brother bullying him as a kid. It felt good to see him finally talk about that and start to unpack it like a healthy adult. With that being said though, it sucks that it took this much for Stu to learn how to communicate his feelings properly. And honestly, I totally get this. As a person, that's a hard thing to move past. I spent so much of my life trying to be a brick wall and bottling up my emotions. From early childhood all the way to a good portion of my adulthood, I can recall trying my best to hold back my sad emotions and never cry. The worst part about it was that this wasn't even as a result of how I was raised. My parents raised me to know that it's okay to have feelings and that it's okay to cry. Society, on the other hand, was the problem. I grew up in a world where it felt like it wasn't okay for boys or men to have feelings and cry. I grew up going to school and being told to suck it up and that it's not okay to be sad by not only teachers but also other kids. It honestly sucked, and I totally have empathy for Stu as a man myself that really struggled with breaking down the walls of toxic masculinity and learning how to share my feelings in a healthy manner, whether they're sad feelings or not. In Stu, I see the struggles of a lot of people that I know or have met over the years. The pain that you hold on to and keep to yourself because you feel like you're a burden or because you feel like someone else in the world is going through something so much worse than you are, it's a really sad feeling that I'm very familiar with, and I know how much that hurts. Now, on the other hand, in Didi, I see a lot of the struggles of those people who try to break down those walls and get their closed off loved ones to talk. The ending of this episode is really ironic because we hear Stu talking about all of these things that both of them gained from therapy, like hearing each other out and not taking their relationship for granted, but he fails to realize that he's the only one who gained those things. All of those things he was talking about are literally what Didi preaches all the time. Now, what sucks about that, and this kind of circles back to why I said that Stu was oblivious earlier, is the fact that he had to basically trick himself into thinking that he was hearing those things from somebody else to make them finally stick. Like, Didi has clearly been trying to tell him these things for a long time now, and he seems to dismiss all of her ideas, saying that psychology is a load of garbage. But like, they sit down with this hack doctor who sleeps through almost the entirety of their hour-long session as Stu finally talks about his feelings to Didi, and now all of a sudden he believes in psychology and is ready to worship the ground that Dr. Lepidamine walks on. It was just ridiculous, to be honest, and it makes me frustrated because there are so many people in the world like this. If you've ever come across one of those people, then you probably know what it's like feeling like you're talking to a brick wall because you're not the target demographic that said person tends to take seriously. Furthermore, I find it kind of hilarious that a child psychologist of all people is the one to get through to Stu. That to me feels like it's portraying that Stu has the emotional intelligence of a child. Now, the situation between Stu and Didi is a tough one. Didi expressed that she had no idea that Stu was struggling and carrying around all of this trauma constantly. That's really hard. I mean, you can look at it as A, he didn't open up to her about his struggles clearly, but also B, maybe she didn't ask about his mental health and if he's been struggling. Maybe though, C, she did ask about it and he still chose not to open up. It could have been any of those things. Who knows? But with that being said, it's a two-way street to be fair. It's just as important to reach out for help as it is to make sure that your loved ones are doing okay. All in all, this episode is kind of ridiculous in the grand scheme of things. I mean, Didi took a literal infant to a psychologist. By all means, I get observing your infant for signs of anything you might want to be aware of, but like, a 1-year-old can't really comprehend their thoughts and feelings very well, let alone communicate them to be psychoanalyzed. This episode is one that's really interesting for me to look back on because I completely forgot about this one. Like, it's one of those episodes where it came back to me when I watched it, and I can recall vague memories of seeing this episode as a kid, but I completely forgot about what happened or what it was about. Like, as a child, the whole idea of Tommy being at a psychologist's office went completely over my head. I didn't even for a second think about connecting the dots that Tommy was the one taken there because he drew on the walls. I'm pretty sure as a kid, I thought that they went there because Stu needed therapy and Tommy just kind of got into trouble while they were there like he did earlier when he was coloring on the walls. I mean, in all reality, that's basically what ended up happening, but as a kid, I had no idea that all of this was supposed to revolve around Tommy. If there's anything else that I want to touch on in closing, it has to be that intro sequence. I really love how they pulled off the intro scenes for most of the episodes of this show because usually they include a close-up of an everyday item, but so close that it's hard to tell what it is. In this case, it ended up being a close-up of a crayon drawing on the wall, and the end result is some primo Tommy Pickles drawing on a wall ASMR. But what do you guys think? Do you think that Tommy being forced into therapy as an infant was justified? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback and positive comments. As always, I have to give the world's biggest shout out to my patrons. You guys are the absolute best, and it makes my heart so happy to shout you out in every single video. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to drop a like, and make sure that you leave a comment to let me know what you think, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see all of you in the next one. Peace.